All right, I'm looking through my notes here. I went way too in depth on this. I will. You wouldn't even care about half the stuff I'm going to write. So I'll tell you, but I don't think I'm going to write it all. If you want me to write something, go ahead, write that down. But the points there that I'm talking about are exhaust valve. One, it runs very hot. We looked at the slide. Runs very hot. All right. And I had the temperatures, about 1,400 degrees for a solid. And I think the hottest spot was about 1,000 for the sodium. In our next class together, we're going to talk a lot about exhaust gas temperatures, which is just what it sounds like. It's the temperature of the exhaust gas and what that, how we manipulate it, what it means, and all that kind of stuff. But my airplane runs 1450, and I take the temperature about that far out of the exhaust valve. So that's typical for your exhaust valve or exhaust gas temperature. I will just tell you that exhaust gas temperature is a relative term. So, if you got the same plane I had, I'll go, wow, I'm running at 1,400. You're like, whoa, I'm at 1,380, dude. I'm like, oh, what's wrong with my engine? Nothing. It's just our probes are at different spots. That's all that means. So, let's see. The solid stem, we talked about that. Green is bad. Just like when you have a cold, green is... Actually, let me write it the right way.
What's green?
Snot.
Yeah. Bad stuff.
Green means stop. I haven't told you what that means yet. I just wrote green means stop. I said green is bad, like when you have a cold, right? Just don't make me get gross here. Green is bad. So in the valve world here, or in the cylinder world, I should say, one of the things that we do is, I don't want to get too much into differential compression checks because Larry really does a great job with that, but I want you to understand what they are. So usually I go into more detail with them. I'm going to back off on that. So every annual or 100-hour inspection, what it's required to do is a differential compression check. Now, anybody done a compression check on their car? Yeah, and so you basically hook up a gauge that says 0, and you crank it over, right? And the gauge kind of pumps up, and it's how much pressure that cylinder can ultimately put in a hose is all that amounts to. And it's an indication of, same thing, how are the valves, how are the how are the rings. In aviation, we do it much different. We actually use, you've all seen it, right? Now, we use the differential compression tester on your valves on the cylinder in there. Difference is when it's on the airplane, we do it at 80 psi. So we put 80 psi into a cylinder across an orifice, and we look and see how much of that 80 stays in there. And the reason why we do it our way is because, one, we have a big prop we can hang on to, so it makes life easier. But we want to know where this air is leaking from. And it's changed over the years. Like I said, I can get into great nuance, which maybe I will a little bit more if we have time. But like, for example, at one point Continental said, we can't have any leakage past the valves. And now they've really changed. Continental is so different from Lycoming on these tests. Lycoming has pretty much had it one way. It matches 4313. I've never seen it change. They've never varied. They've always said stuff like, well, 80 over 80 be perfect. It should be like 68 over 80 or better. If it gets down into this, then that's bad. Or if you have a difference of these two, that's bad. Continental is so different. They have you do this thing called a master orifice check, where you actually plug everything in, turn it to 80, and then check a leak on a calibrated orifice. And whatever that reads, then they say, okay, whatever that reads, that's the cutoff. Can't be worse than that. And depending on how long your hose is, how much air is coming through, all kinds of various factors will be how much it is. So it's usually about 32, 34, somewhere around there. So Continental's like, as long as it's better than 32 or 34, don't worry about it. Well, Lycoming, they would have a cow if it was at 30. You'd have to pull the cylinder. There's no way you could continue to run that. You'd be in big trouble. So Continental's so different. But what is so, not only those different, but what's so different about Continental says, and you will do a bore scope inspection. You will take a camera and look inside there and evaluate the valves. Lycoming doesn't say that. So having a Continental, you have to get in there and look at the valves, which I do. So you have to kind of know, well, what am I looking for? Well, when you look down in there, green means stop. There, green means stop, says right there. Because green comes after red in the color spectrum here. So burnt pizza is good. I'll write that back. Burnt pizza, green means stop. Burnt pizza. Burnt pizza is good. You can remember that stuff, right? Okay. So let me enlarge this a little bit so maybe you can see it. Green means stop. Let me see which way they go. Burnt pizzas are okay. So there we go. First indication, circular color pattern is slightly uneven and non-symmetrical. So this is what's the anatomy of a valve going bad right here. So we've got, maybe kill the lights so we can pull up the color on some of this. So you can see how we've got kind of a C down here. You got, this is redder up here. Then before you know it, you got red showing up here. Well, this is starting to look burnt pizza-ish, but that's orange, pumpkin spice up here. Moving forward, now you can start to see green. You see that this valve needs to come out. It's going to go bad. So you got green. There it is. Now it's cracking.
Why does it start on one side of the valve?
This is a valve that would have not been seating properly in this area.
Is that all the same valve?
Yes. Yes. So it's the progression of this valve through its failure point. And what happened is it was not seating properly. So if you would have done a compression test, you would have heard air leaking out of the exhaust. And you would have known, wow, we've got a valve that's not seating real well. Well, maybe it was seating to a point where it was 50 over 80. And like, oh, Continental says that's good, not 38 yet. But you go in there and look with a bore scope and you see something like this, you would say, whoa, wait a minute. I've got an uneven pattern. It's getting hotter up here. Something's wrong. Well, at that point, you could take the valve out while the engine's together. And Larry's going to teach you how to do that. Pop the valve out, come up from the inside, put some lapping compound, put it back in, use a drill and a rubber hose from the opposite side.
The rope trick?
Rope trick. Yeah, we call it the rope trick. And lap it from the backside. I didn't show you how to do that, but lap this thing in and possibly save it. And then come back, bore scope it later. But once it starts getting like this, that little green showing, no, I think you're a little bad here. It's time to change out that valve because it's just going to crack and break. So burnt pizzas are okay. Don't be alarmed by the bright color or deposits around the edges. The symmetrical pattern shows the valve is just fine. I want symmetrical. I want symmetry. Thick lead deposits from an overly rich mixture give this healthy valve the appearance of an overcooked pizza. We'll talk next class about running lean. And I've seen people, when I was at Lycoming School, I thought they were going to start throwing blows between two people. When you start talking running engines lean, it's like Republicans and Democrats. I mean, there's no meeting in the middle. It's like you're either there or you're over there. And when one side gets more than the other, then we come out of flying. And so,
which camp are you in?
I'm a lean runner. Lean is good. Lead is bad. So, here we go. I'll pull this back up. Normal combustion chamber right there. That's what I want to see. It's pretty symmetrical. This is the intake valve, right? Because it's much larger. But I see it. I'm like, well, it's not really symmetrical because I've got all this brown right here. What is that? Does it tell me? I know what it is.
Is it farther away from the spark plug?
It is. It's a combustion product. See, like it follows the contour of this whole intake combustion chamber. So this is all that combustion. So I'm not worried about that being asymmetrical. And that runs cool. This I worry about. This is totally symmetrical. I love that. You got the burnt pizza in the middle. It's black around the outside. Everything. It's a nice circular. Now this one's clean, but you got green showing up over here because green means
Stop.
green means stop. All right.
Interesting, there's no combustion product left over. Is that because they had to already clean them?
On what?
On
On
the right
this side? Different cylinder could be running cleaner.
Okay.
So we have so much lead in our gas, and lead is really a bad thing. It's bad for everything. It doesn't. Well, it's a whole other topic, but they talk a lot about seat regression. We'll get into that in the next class, which they say is the only good thing about lead. It prevents seats from it. That's a weird thing in itself. But other than that, it's really bad. And so some people let their engines run. Their pilots are terrified. They don't understand how to manage their engine. So they're told to never touch the mixture. See, in your car, a computer does it. When you go up in the mountains, it leans it out. It gives it less fuel because there's less air. Our engines, at least our legacy engines, pilot does all that. And we're taught as pilots, and I'll put my pilot hat on, you don't touch that mixture knob until you're at least 5,000 feet. If you so much as touch it or even look at it too long, the engine will explode and fall out of the engine, out of the aircraft. Just looking at it. So don't ever touch it. And when you get to 5,000, if you touch it, you have a 50-50 chance of just exploding. So, but that's not the truth, right? You just have to know what you're actually doing. So, my airplane, I lean a lot. And I'm on the ground idling, I pull it back so far that sometimes I kill it accidentally, and I try and catch it. But that's how much I'm super aggressive. Then on takeoff, I'll let it go full rich. But the minute I get to the altitude I want, like last night, on the way home, I went to 1,500 feet. Level off 1,500 feet, make my power reduction, reach over and grab that mixture and pull it way back. So I lean the hell out of it 1,500 feet. It's good for it. It saves me money. All right, so I got the green. Green means stop. Burnt pizza is good. Okay, we talked about that. I did mention the oil coking. So 3 oil cokes at 575 degrees F or 300 degrees C. That's a test question at some point. I don't know if it's this week or later. This is why some engines have valve sticking problems. Coke builds up and pushes valves to one side. Oh, okay, so right there. What temperature did our valve stem get to?
1,400 or 1,000? Or just... Or red gasoline.
All right, so right in here we're at,
1,100 or 1,000?
this is Fahrenheit, so yeah, right in this area. We're at over 1,000 degrees no matter how you look at it, really. Well, solid stem is way out here. So at 575 degrees, oil's going to coke. And oil is dripping through a guide and valve right in here. So how hot is that oil? Is it more than 575? If it is, it's going to coke. And when coking is going to do what?
Valve sticking.
It's going to stick that valve. So if you're going to work on piston aircraft, that is the thing you've got to know. You've got to know about sticking valves. You've got to know it's a real thing. It happens way too often. Lycomings especially Lycoming helicopter engines. They want you to check that a lot. So Lycomings tend to have this problem, which is funny. They're the ones with the sodium valves. Continental, big bore Continentals, the intake and exhaust stems are the same size. But yet we don't have sticking valves in our Continentals for some strange reason. It does happen. It's just not that common. If somebody called up and said, "Yeah, I got a Continental and the valve's stuck," I'd be like, "Yeah, that does happen." It wouldn't surprise me. So what happens is this thing called morning sickness. So, and that's the term that we're going to use in the industry is morning sickness. So what that means is you get in your aircraft and you start it up and it just shakes like a dog passing a peach pit, right? It shakes real bad when you start it up and it's cold. But as it warms up, it got better. Well, what was happening? So what happens is it was cold, everything is tighter, the camshaft comes around, pushes the valve open, it was allowed to push open, and what closes it? Springs brought it back real slow. And so now it's hanging open, so that cylinder's running really bad, so it's just shaking. And then pretty soon things warm up and the space between the guide and the valve open up enough so the springs, now everything works. And so what is it? What's the cure? Well, always make sure you warm up your engine before you fly. Eventually what will happen, and it usually, for some reason, happens in flight, you're flying along and bam, you lose that cylinder. And when you open up, and so you do an emergency landing if you can, hopefully, or make it back to the airport. When you open the cowling, you will see a push rod going nice and straight, and the one next to it going up in the air. Because what happened is that valve usually it can stick in any position, but if it sticks anywhere but full open, the push rod tries to push it, and that valve says, "I ain't going," and the camshaft comes around, pushes on the tappet, and the only thing to give is the push rod. So everything goes to hell in the handcart. So if you have morning sickness, the cure is immediately do what?
Alright, check for sticking valves.
You gotta take out the valves and ream them. Lycoming it's called the wobble test, where you take off the springs, you see how much it wobbles. Honestly, I never did it in the field because I had a cylinder shop. I'm like, it's just faster to fix it than it is to.
Yeah, if you do it in the field, do you do it on the engine?
Yeah.
And so how do you get rid of all the shit that goes into the engine? You suck it out in the vacuum?
I know, that's the thing. It's like you got to take off the intake. You got to take off even if you pull the cylinder, you have to anyway. But you have to take off the intake. You're gonna get that stuff in there somewhere. That's just the way it is. I don't believe you'll get it all out, but because some of it's gonna go down by the rings. Do the best you can.
You invent something.
Yeah.
An oil filter fixes it.
All right, so we talked about, we talked about morning sickness. The stuck valves, which is that? Stuck valves. We already talked about they may be sodium filled. We talked about the stellite added to the face and tip. I'll rewrite that for you because I don't think I wrote stellite. Stellite. That's just a hardened material or hardening. Is added to face and tip. We talked about exhaust has a larger stem, at 45 degrees. We talked about why. We didn't talk about this. So valves are designed to rotate. It's very important that they rotate. So small continentals have no rotating means whatsoever. They're just like, well, good luck with that. Sorry about that. Your Lycoming on the intake side, same thing. Hey, rotate, good luck with that. But your exhaust side has a means for rotation, and all Continentals, I think the new ones might have it. They use a thing called a rotocoil. This is a rotocoil. So you have a spring seat, your upper spring seat, and you push that down, you put the keepers in, right? And that's a solid spring seat. This is the upper spring seat for a Continental, both sides. And you can see that, so the tops, it rotates. So even if the bottom, the springs didn't rotate, the valve could rotate around quite nicely. Don't drop it, it's careful. It's breakable. So valves are designed to rotate. So Continental, TCM, uses the rotocoil. They go bad. You have to watch them and check them when you take them out. Make sure they spin and everything. Lycoming uses rotator caps. Rotator caps. And it's kind of a weird thing. So you guys know on your exhaust, you had two half moon looking valve keepers. They're different than the intake, right? So the little half moon. And then on top of it was a little black cap.
Yeah.
So what happens is when you assemble your cylinders and you put that all in, without the cap on, you can see that the spring seat is really hard against those little half moon pieces. Okay? And then you'll set the little cap on top that seems to do nothing. But what happens is when the rocker arm comes down and it presses on that little cap, that cap actually doesn't sit on top of the valve like you think. So like if I had the valve like this, the cap would actually be, I'll do this. And you have the little half moon keeper right here. Follow so far?
Yep.
My idiot drawing. that little cap is going to look like this. Right? It's kind of solid up here. It doesn't touch the valve stem. It touches the seat, the keeper. And so what happens when the rocker arm comes around and presses down, it presses on, I hope I got this right, presses on the little half moon and unloads the spring seat from the valve. So the springs are no longer part of the valve assembly. It pushes down in such a way that it leaves the valve, or I should say it pushes down on the spring seat and leaves the valve free now to spin. So it spins on its own.
Are there ball bearings in here? Or?
I've never taken it apart, but I don't think so. I think it's a wound spring inside there. So, yeah. So valves are going to rotate.
I mean, the valve tip doesn't really get worn then?
No.
If it's just not.
No, but not at all.
Yeah.
But the cap does.
Probably better.
All right, so let's see. That was all about the exhaust valve. Intake valve, it's almost the same stuff. We already talked about all that. Talked about that. Light coming. Let's see, so we talked about that. Valve keepers. You should not reuse valve keepers. Do not reuse. Do not reuse valve keepers. They're cheap enough. Throw them away. Buy new ones. Holy crap, I got into a bunch of stuff. Then I got into valve guides. Let me see, which we talked about in lab. Let me see. Tell you what I wrote. Installed into cylinder head guide boss with an interference fit. What does interference fit mean? Tight fit, hammer fit. The actual guide is bigger than the hole that it goes into. Let's see. Intake made of various softer alloys, bronze, brass. Exhaust made of much harder alloys, steel. Oh man, they have some funny names for nitrosist and stuff like that. Always use the same manufacturer for the valve and guide. Manufacturers, because, well, when I was doing it, we had Superior, you had your factory, and then you had ECI, but like I said, now, like TCM or Continental makes Lycoming parts, which used to be ECI parts, stuff Superior. You don't ever want to mix and match the stuff because they don't all use the same materials. And so you mix and match materials, you're going to get a bad result. So I always use whatever brand. So if I'm going to put in a Lycoming exhaust guide, it's going to be a genuine Lycoming valve. If I'm going to use an ECI guide, it's an ECI valve. Never ever mix and match those things. Let me see. Talked about the alignment. We talked about guide wear. Talked about coke and sticking. Talked about morning sickness. Talked about valve seats. Also an interference. Oh, okay. One of the things I tried to explain and may not have done a really good job because it's hard to do in the lab is, go ahead. Okay, thank you. We have a valve seat, right? There's my seat. Valve seat? Okay. And we have a valve, right? And the valve is going to sit in here. And hopefully it's going to sit something like that. And when we lap it in, we can see that we have contact, from here to here. All right. And I explained to you in the lab how, what I'm looking for. I want a little bit of space right here, more here. So it's like 1/3 here, 2/3 here kind of a thing. And sort of a judgment call about how wide it sits. If it's too wide, then you don't have the pressure that you need to blow out carbon. If it's too narrow, you don't have the cooling. If this seat is too close to the edge, then you could run into problems with cracking because it's too close to the edge. If it's too far back towards the stem, then you're leaving the valve hanging out there where it's not getting cooling, right? I talked about all these things. Everybody follow? So one of the things that you can do to adjust where this sits. So let's just say, we got one of the valves and I showed you, oh no, it's sitting way too close to out here on the edge where the margin is, right? And I said we can change how that is. Well, one thing you can do is I call it topping, and you come in. So if this is a 45 right here, we can come in with a stone that's shallower and just knock that little section off right there with like a 30 degree. Or if it was hitting too far down here, we use something that is much, much steeper and knock this off right here. So like a 65 or 75 or 60 or 70. So well, let's say 60. What did I say in my notes? Yeah, like 60 or 75 degrees. I call that bottoming. Sometimes you hear this talked about in automotive with a 3-angled seat. You know, or I've heard people brag about, oh, no, these are three-angled seats. You know, it's a big deal. I'm like, I don't know if it's a big deal. It seems to me like that's what I do to fix a problem, but okay. You know, what do I know? So, but anyway, I tried to convey that to you in lab and hopefully understood that. Let's see. I explained Allison and straight cut seats. Valve springs. Let me see. And then valve train. All right, super smart guys. Why do we need to know all this stuff? I mean, some of it's a little deep.
Helps with diagnostic.
That's it. It's exactly it. Helps you diagnose a problem. So it's embarrassing when you can't diagnose something. So one time I had a client bring me his Cessna 140. And I love Cessna 140s. I learned to fly in one. And he brings it. Now this Cessna 140, normally a 140 comes with a C85, Continental 85 horsepower, the older, C85. And he had his STC for an 0200, which is 100 horsepower. So he had a whopping 15 more horsepower. It's a really neat plane too. So he brings it in, do the annual, had bad compression on one cylinder. So I had the cylinder guy come out, I pulled the cylinder, I don't remember, it doesn't matter. We pulled the cylinder off, gave it to the cylinder guy to fix. And he fixes the cylinder, bolt on the cylinder, finish the annual, do the test run, thing runs perfect. Customer comes, gets the airplane, flies it, comes back, he's like, I mean, you're not gonna believe this thing, man. He goes, I get to a certain RPM, and he goes, it is just scary. The whole airplane just starts shaking. He goes, I'll back off, and it gets smooth again. Now go back in this RPM, just starts shaking like crazy. Like, wow, I don't know, man, Rule number one is you should always go back to the things you did, right? So, but, thinking, well, maybe we've got a magneto problem. At higher RPMs, you have higher cylinder pressure. Higher cylinder pressure means that the electrical system has to work harder under those pressures because, as you know, higher pressures means electrically speaking, things got wider. You need more voltage. Okay, maybe that's the problem. We have bad plugs. Well, plugs tested fine. It's been so long. I don't know. I'll make up some stuff. So replace the plugs. Try it again because they're cheap. Nope, still does it. Imagine every time you do it, you got to bring it in, you got to decal it, you got to charge the customer, you got to buy parts. He has to take time off from work to come down, test fly his aircraft. Okay, it wasn't the plugs. Well, let's try a new harness. Order a new harness. Put on a new harness. Putting a harness on an aircraft takes many hours. To do it right. Fly it. That doesn't work. I mean, we try all these. I forget all the crazy things we tried. Any guesses?
Counter rotating or whatever.
Yeah, it's the Johnson rod thing in there.
I forgot the name. Drawing a blank, dude.
Counterweights?
Yes, thank you.
0200s don't have counterweights. Good thought.
Wow.
Good thought, though. Could have detuned it or something.
That wasn't seeing crap.
I went around and round with this thing, and I flew with him, and it was scary when it did. I'm like, whoa, don't do that again. All right, let's go back. I mean, it really shook it hard. It was scary how hard it shook this thing. We're going to lose the engine off the front. I had absolutely ran out of just patience and things to do on this airplane, and we were charging him a fortune to fix it. And so I go into the cylinder guy, and I just sat down. I said, man, you gotta sit down. You gotta start thinking, man, what in the world would cause an 0200 like this to just shake so bad? He goes, well, first of all, it's not an 0200, it's C85. I said, no, it's not. It's an 0200. It's like, oh, shit. What'd you do? He goes, I thought it was a C85. I built it up as a C85 cylinder.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, God.
What's the difference? One little spring on the valve. An O200 has 3 valve springs. A C85 has 2.
Wow, no shit, dude. That's crazy.
Valve float. So what happened, it sets up a resonant and the valves wouldn't seat. They just kind of float in there.
That's messed up.
That's messed up.
You guys charged him all that money?
I'll tell you more messed up story. It's not related, but it is cylinder stuff. So we would bore cylinders oversized. So we had a customer who brought in it was a Globe Swift and has an 0300, so it has 6 of these on it. And I don't know, I wasn't involved in why, but anyway, we bored them oversized, which I think would have been 15 over on that particular engine. So the procedure to bore cylinders oversized is we put them on our hone, and we would there's a counter, and you'd set the counter, and I know what I did, I would just go for like 100 strokes on the thing at a certain pressure. And then you take it off and kind of use the bore gauge, check where you are. I also learned to never set the bore gauge on top of that because the vibrations cause it to go out of calibration, which nobody else had ever noticed. I'm like, you guys notice this thing goes out of no, we never noticed. We just kept using it. So long story there, but I found a nice little vibration free place. So anyway, I would do it and I would cycle through. I'd do like 1, maybe 500 strokes. Then it gets pretty hot. I mean, so hot that you can't really hang on to them very long. You can take them off the machine and set them down real quick. That's hot. And so I'd do another one, and kind of go through them until I got close to about 1 to 2 thousandths away. And I would stop and I would leave them overnight. So they would cool to room temperature. Otherwise, you're measuring a hot cylinder, which is going to show. You'd be surprised how big they get. And so you always wait that extra day to do this, right? So then in the morning, I would come in, I would be about 1,000, 2,000 away. And then I would just do the final 2 thousandths of an inch. So this is before I did it. But anyway, so he had bored the cylinders over, put them all together, put them on the Globe Swift. And as was customary where we were, because it's, small airport, big work, we'd, come out and take a break and watch the airplane fly off. And so I come out, airplane, sounds great. And guy takes the runway and he takes off. Remember, and this is out, out in the fields out there, takes off. And this kind of makes a left turn and smoke on. And I look at the cylinder, I go, I didn't know it had a smoke system on it. I mean, he just turned white. He goes, it doesn't. He goes, oh my God, I forgot to do the final bore. And so the guy, I mean, we can't call him or anything because we don't have a tower or frequency, but I mean, it's just starting to smoke after just 30 seconds. And so we watch him come over. It's like, oh crap, it is smoking hard. And head on over to executive, which would have been that way for us. And, it is like we were on the phone, is this guy going to make it? What's going to happen? And to talk to him later, he's like, I took off. I crossed over you guys, started headed for exec, and I look over and my temperature gauges are just pegged. And he goes, I didn't want to turn around and land at Clarksburg because we have power lines and a big oak tree at one end. So you have to kind of come around. It's just a bad scenario if you're, So he tried to make it, or he did. He made it to executive, called an emergency, went into executive, and put it in his hangar. And so I went with the cylinder guy to disassemble this engine. And it was just astonishing. We could take off the nuts of the cylinder, but we couldn't budge the cylinder. We had to use the prop and hang on it and move the prop and get the piston to kind of come out with the cylinder, and then put 2x4s and stuff behind the cylinder and use the prop to pull the piston back out. And it melted it pretty damn good. So that's about what 2 thousandths will do to you if you're off by that much. So, yeah. All right, so I tell you not that story. That was just, don't screw up. Well, what's the lesson of that story? Well, when I got in the cylinder shop, guess what I did? Checks and balances and worksheets and sign-offs, and there's no way that was going to happen to me. Somebody else had to come into the shop and verify all my bores. I'm the one that made that rule. You have to come check me. So, and it wasn't anything more than me just, you stand there, let me show you how I did this. And, because I knew more than they did, and I would measure it, and I see, that's the measurement. It's supposed to be like that. See? And they're like, if you say so, but still made somebody else do it while I stood there. But I wanted to.
And now sign your name here.
And initial that. You're on the hook. Everybody knew who was on the hook. Was I on 9? I don't know. 4, 5, whatever. 6? I'm making up points as I go. Springs. Springs. So I told you the first story, tell you about springs. You think springs don't matter? I'm here to say they really stinking do. All right, springs. This is what closes the valve, right? Closes the valve. I rarely reuse springs. On an overhaul, I wouldn't even think about it. But on a repair, I would check them the same way you guys checked them. If they're good on a repair, back they go. But on an overhaul, don't even check them. Wasn't worth my time. Let's see. So valves open and close. Let me see if it operates about 20 to 30 times a second. If this math was right, which ends up being valve opens 1 time per 720 degrees. Yeah, engine's running 2,600. Valve opens 1,300 times a minute. So that ends up being 1,300 times a minute times a minute. So that's quite a bit. Yeah, closes the valve, keeps it closed. So you usually have sets of 2 or 3 springs. Which engine has 3 springs?
No, 200.
Oh, 200.
No.
What is the absolute difference between? Because this stud assembly could be used for 85s, 90s, 200s, 300s. What is literally the only difference between this cylinder, between an O200 and a C85, is literally just that one valve, because it's different RPMs. So, valve springs, that was it. I think it's the same valves, everything. Let's see. Oh, this is important. So they have dampened or progressive wound springs. It's same thing. There have been times when I found they didn't have a progressive wound spring or dampened spring, that they were symmetrical top and bottom, but almost always I've noticed they're tighter wound on the bottom. So tighter wound on the bottom. So when you put your cylinders together, you do have progressive wound springs. The tighter goes on the bottom. And I showed you in lab, there's just a real fast, easy trick. It's just funny, when you look at them, it's really hard to tell. I mean, you can kind of go, oh, I think I kind of see it, and you turn around, no, I don't see it. There's just a super, super simple way to do it. And like I said, you just take your pen or whatever and go where the spring, I can't do it on the drawing, but you just go where the spring stops and look at the space where it stops to the next one, and how much of your finger or pen can you get in there? Try it on the other side, and it'll be so obvious. You just can't even mess it up. You can.
Is that a challenge?
You can. Multiple valve springs present resonant frequencies that lead to valve float. This is a Q&A, I think. So multiple valve springs. Prevent resonant frequencies that lead to valve float. What's valve float?
Or it just stays in place and just all the way.
So you put a valve in a glass and a little bit of root beer. And that's where it bounces around. Instead of open and close, it just kind of.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah, because I've had to talk about this with the same thing with points in a magneto. It's like, how can you really explain the float? It's just
Or it never comes to rest.
never comes to rest. Even when it's supposed to come to rest, it just kind of bounces around. It's like constantly bouncing. Also, and prevents this, and it prevents this spring vibration. And surging. I believe that's a Q&A question somewhere. Surging.
What is it?
Oh, surge. Yeah, go forward. Like, what is a surge?
Yeah, like in reference to spring. Like, what does that even mean?
I don't know. I even wrote next to it Q&A, which usually is my code for I don't know what the hell they want. I just tell people that. They make up weird stuff. What is a surge? Like a storm surge, you know, where the water comes in further than it should have. That's what I was thinking. Storm surge. And then don't forget you have your spring seats. There should be an upper and lower. Of course, the upper spring seat for a Continental is a what?
Top hat.
A rotocoil
Oh.
for a Continental. They are not the same for your engine. Your lower seats you probably have the same lower seats. So you're going to have 8 lower seats, 4 upper intake, 4 upper exhaust. Even though your part manual won't show that, because your parts manual shows the old style valves that have the same keepers as your intake. They switched to.
So seat is top and bottom,
Yes, you have an upper seat and a lower seat.
but then Lycoming uses rotator caps in the seat.
No, Continental uses rotocoils. Lycoming just happens to take a rotator cap and stick it on the top at the last second
Of the seat.
of the valve.
Okay.
Your little cup, little tiny cup,
Yeah.
sits on the valve, not the seat. Oh, that's what it is. I'm pretty sure this is wrong. And instead, I think what it does, because I was trying to think in my mind, how does that work? I believe this comes over and you have your spring seat. I think this cap presses down on the seat is what it is.
That would make more sense.
That makes more sense. And unloads the seat off of the keeper, which allows it to spin. That's it.
Yeah.
Follow?
I was
Okay.
wondering. I was like, you put all the pressure on the keeper. It's like,
I know, it still didn't. It didn't.
I feel like a keeper would slip out and then there goes the
Yeah,
valve.
just
and
go
then-
straight.
See, in my mind, I say stuff like that. It goes, that doesn't sound right at all. But nobody's saying anything, so I guess it makes sense to them. I'll just let it go. See if it
Yeah, you
You shouldn't believe anything I say. What the hell's wrong with you
question
people?
everything.
All right. That brings me to the valve train.
I thought we were talking about airplanes.
Now we're talking about trains. What class did you think this was?
ATC.
Yeah. All right, talked about that. Valve train. One of the hard parts about using the Lycoming that I've chosen to use with you guys is that we have solid lifters, which would be great if your only things that have solid lifters are the 290, the 235, and radial engines. Nothing else has it. Even his World War II A65 engine has hydraulic lifters in it. So I'm going to tell you all about hydraulic lifters, so you're going to get it. And then when you get into Larry's class, he will have you disassemble the top end off of the Cessna 150s, and you will learn all about hydraulic tappets. Unless you get the 152, which has a Lycoming 0235, then you will get solid tappets again. So, all right, so this is what makes up the valve train. The camshaft. Whose camshaft is this? That is a
Four-cylinder.
Lycoming. That's how they come now. See, the
Oh,
gear is all
yes.
part of it.
Yeah.
So, Lycoming. Some of it's copper colored. Why is it copper colored? It's nitrided. Wherever it's not copper, it's nitrided. So, see? Nitrided between the gears, but not on the tips.
You didn't know it was Lycoming because you haven't seen it that nice.
Oh, okay. So, valve train consists of the camshaft, the tappet body. Now we have roller tappets. That's radials have always had them, but now we're starting to see them in flat engines. Tappet, either roller or not. A push rod and rocker arm. This over here is the hydraulic tappet that goes inside of the tappet body, which we will talk about.
Sometimes you say lifter, sometimes you say tappet, interchangeable.
Interchangeable. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I was gonna ask the same question.
Yeah, because that says lifter. So Maybe if I really thought about it, maybe Continental calls them lifters and Lycoming calls them tappets. That might be the case. Maybe that's why it happens. This is out of a 6-cylinder Continental, big bore. So I'll talk about those tappets, lifters. What else we got? That is the case. Yes.
Is there a reason why, on the previous slide, is there a reason why some of those lobes are wider than the others?
Okay, he's got a question. Is there a reason why some are wider than the other? Yes, there is. Any other questions? Well, I guess the question is, it appears that some of them are wider than others,
Yeah.
and that's because if you measure them, they are.
I'm so enlightened right now.
It's for the shared intake.
I think it is, yeah.
Can't count them.
Yeah, typically it's the shared intake. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Well, that didn't work out for me, did it? Did I miscount? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, this time I only counted 12. So probably exhaust, double intake, exhaust, exhaust, double intake, exhaust, exhaust, double intake, exhaust. 10, but I counted 2 every time. That's whatever. Who knows? All right. Yeah. So, boy, if my theory holds true, this was a Continental one, and they call them lifters, and this is a Lycoming one, and they call them tappets. Tappet.
Why is one of those tappets look so bloated compared to the other two?
Yeah, that one's all pretty.
Right there.
Shrug giving in.
It's hyperbolic.
So
It
is
must have.
that what's
Hey,
gonna happen to me
hey,
after I
body
dinner? I
positivity,
get
come on.
hyperbolic?
It positively has more body. Huh?
Yeah.
More to love.
Yeah, is that supposed to be that way?
Yes, it's supposed that's part number 15 Bravo 26262. That is the hyperbolic tappet. All right, valve train. How much time do I have?
5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Should we start this tomorrow?
We can finish it by today.
Valve train. Okay.
What's that?
Valve train. I'm done.
Long story you wanted to tell us about?
It's like a 15, 20-minute story. Valve train. We'll start there tomorrow.